Hey, good to see everybody. Hope you all are doing well. So, to start us out with, let's start at the beginning. A long time ago, there was not a universe, there was no space, there was no time, and then whoosh, something happened. We know, what we can know is that just as we expand and contract in our breathing, so too does the whole universe expand and contract. And at the beginning of this universe, there was an expansion. And that expansion rate was just right. It was just right. If the universe had expanded just a hair's breadth faster or slower than it did, we wouldn't have a universe. And to me, this understanding of the universe is totally in alignment with the Buddha's teaching of the middle way. Not too fast, not too slow, just right. We live in this universe that everything comes to be because the whole universe follows the Tao. Not too fast, not too slow, not too much, not too little. Somewhere between birth and death. Not birth, not death. Right? Somewhere in the middle there. This is the insight of the Buddha. And it's thanks to the way the universe works. The Buddha didn't come up with this. He didn't make it. He just noticed it. And what happened as a result of this just right expansion is the formation of galaxies, of stars, and eventually, over billions of years, the Earth and all of the myriads of species that we have on this Earth, all of the life forms that are here. And we can connect with that primal Tao through noticing, becoming aware of our breath, that expansion and that contraction, right? Just that expansion and contraction. Take a moment just to expand and contract, right? Just to notice it. You don't do it. We don't do the expansion and contraction. And especially when we sit zazen, we notice the expansion and contraction is happening. And the most obvious place where it happens involuntarily is with the breathing. So let's take a moment just to notice that expansion and contraction happening right at the center of our being. Just connecting with that connects us to the whole universe in a really profound way, beyond our measure. However, how do we put that alignment, coming into alignment with this expansion and contraction, with these principles of the universe? How do we align ourselves in our daily lives? Let me ask you this. If you were to describe Zen practice to somebody, what would you say? I'd love to hear 3 people respond to that question. How would you respond?
Peace.
Okay, peace. Zen is peace. Okay.
A prescription for living.
A prescription for living. Wow, you guys are really advanced. Okay, one more.
The harmony with everything.
Harmony with everything. Wow, so very, very advanced responses here. I was thinking something like Zen practice boils down to Zazen. But you guys are obviously beyond that, so that's fantastic. And that's good because Zen practice is actually much more than simply sitting like we do. I love sitting practice. But how do we take that sitting practice, the Zazen portion, what we just did, what we just engaged in, how do we take that and apply it to our everyday life? And here's the thing, it doesn't have to be difficult or complicated to do. And yet, I think all of us struggle with how to manifest enlightenment in our everyday life. It's easy to do in Zazen because that's what Zazen is. Practice, enlightenment are one. Zazen is being Buddha. It's very easy to do in Zazen, but then we have to get up off of our cushion. So how do we do that? Now, lucky for us, at least, let's just say lucky for us, we have a clear roadmap in the Zen tradition for how to practice in everyday life off of the cushion as well as on the cushion. And as you know, those of you who've been practicing a while, Dogen offers very detailed instructions for how to sit Zazen and what to do with our body. And putting our body in proper alignment. And as well as how do we orient our minds. And that alignment is in alignment with these natural laws of the universe, this expansion and contraction that we see at the very foundational level of the universe, the expansion. But we also know there's contraction, just like spring, summer, fall, winter. Just like birth, growth, and then decay and death, rebirth, right? These expansion and contraction happen all of the time. So again, how do we orient to that in our life? And lucky for us, we have a roadmap. However, I want to suggest that the roadmap we have is good for 13th century Japan, mainly monastics. This roadmap is called the Shingi, the Eihei Shingi and the Keizan Shingi. And I'll get into what that means, but what I want to suggest is that we need to develop a Shingi for 21st century lay practice. And we have some blueprints for how to do that. So I want to give a little introduction to what's called the Shingi. And most people, raise your hand. I'd love to see a show of hands for how many people have ever heard of that word Shingi. I see 2 people raising their hands. Okay, one online and one in the Zen, at the Zen Center room. Okay, whoever raised their hand, I couldn't see the face. Who was that? And what is Shingi?
You just told me it was a way for practice.
So you heard of it just now?
Yeah.
Okay. So, all right. Except for Sofu, who's online here and who's a priest, none of us know what the Shingi is. And this is, I'm realizing this glaring gap in our Zen practice. And so I want to this one Dharma talk on this is not going to do it justice. So this is just an introduction to the Shingi. Actually, Shingi literally means pure standards. And we have a book that was translated by Shohaku Okumura and Taigen Leighton, who are Soto Zen priests. One is Japanese and the other is American. And this is called, they've translated as Dogen's Pure Standards for the Zen Community. So we call this in Japanese the Eihei, for Eihei Dogen, so that's Dogen's name, the Eihei Shingi. And Shingi literally means something like pure standards or pure rules or pure discipline. So there are lots of ways to practice. When I say the word practice, or another way is aligning ourselves with those, with the universal laws of expansion and contraction. There's a lot of ways that we practice that within Soto Zen. I'll just give you I'll give you a few examples here. Koan stories. The study of the koans is certainly a way to synchronize ourselves with that enlightenment impulse. Zazen, of course, is one of those ways. Calligraphy practice, shodo, is a way. We have kendo, swordsmanship, is another way. Orioki, those of you who have sat sesshin and used the orioki bowls, is another way to practice. Flower arrangement is a way. Washing the face in the morning when you wake up is a way. Tea ceremony is a way. Using the toilet is a way. Monthly observances is a way. Yearly observances and daily observances. Now those are really broad categories, and there's a lot of different things that go under them. But they all go under the bigger category of Shingi. So Shingi, pure rules. Shin means pure, and gi means the rules, the immaculate, or another possible translation for Shingi is immaculate regulations. Now, this Shingi, like many Chinese phrases, it's an abbreviation for something much longer. And it would appear, if we look at Shingi by itself, pure rules, right? It would appear that we're saying that the rules themselves of a temple are pure. But that's just the abbreviation. And the full non-abbreviated way of saying it is the rules and disciplines of the pure ocean-like community. So the purity here is not referring to the rules themselves. This is a really important point, but it gets missed in the translation when we hear pure rules. We think the purity is referring to the rules and regulations of a temple. All right, and we'll get to what those rules are. People, I think the word rule and regulation is a buzzword. Maybe it could be possibly triggering for people, especially if we don't like to follow. We don't like rules. We don't like constraints, constrictions, things. So we'll get to that in just a moment. Hold on to your seat just here. Let's first of all get to what is being referred to as pure is not the rules. It's the assembly. It's you. The pure ocean-like assembly. That's you and me. And it's through the rules that purity or that enlightenment gets manifest. It's through practice of these rules and regulations. Now, the rules and regulations, they're not pure because they're changeable, depending on the circumstances and depending on the needs. So Dogen created the Eihei Shingi in the 13th century for a particular time and culture to manifest enlightenment in daily life for his monk students. And then 3 or 4 generations later, Zen Master Keizan, who's also considered the other co-founder of Soto Zen, generated another Shingi, which added on to Dogen's Shingi. And so we have inherited both of these Shingi as Soto Zen practitioners. However, we mainly focus when we go to a Zen center on Zazen. We mainly focus on Zazen. And that's okay, but it's just not, it just covers about 5% of what Soto Zen is about. And that other 95% is going to talk about how do we actually live out enlightenment in our everyday life. Now, this was a question that was posed to the monks that Dogen was living with. How do we do that as predominantly lay people living a householder life, not within the context of a temple? So that's a question. This is a big question that I have. I don't have the answer to that, but I have some suggestions and directions here that I'd like to share over the next several weeks, months, maybe even years of how to do that, because I think it's where our practice is moving towards. One of the pitfalls of any meditation practice is that we get caught up in a psychological kind of aspirations or psychological insights into the nature of reality, or we get caught up in some kind of brief enlightenment experience. And that experience we equate with Zen, or even Zen practice, or even the goal of Zen. But I want to suggest to you that practicing in that way is not Soto Zen. It's not what Zen is about. There may be other practices that are about meditation that are there for you to gain some kind of special insight, understanding, or to feel better about yourself. That's all fine. But Soto Zen is not goal. It's not directed towards that. It's not directed towards finding some kind of peace of mind only. It's not directed towards finding enlightenment in sitting practice only. It's not directed towards finding some kind of enlightenment experience that you can then somehow say, I'm above where I was. I've transcended my own suffering. Right? That's not Soto Zen. We might have some brief experiences like that, but I would suggest that the real aim of Soto Zen is present moment experience in a wholehearted way. Wholeheartedly engaging in the present moment, not only with peace of mind, but with passion of mind. That there ought to be the permission granted for all of us to be passionate about being alive. I think that is actually closer to Soto Zen. That's where we're aiming towards, is a passion for life, a love of life, a real deep love of life, of our life, of the life of our family, of the life of our pets, of the life of the soil that we take care of the life of the community, both Buddhist and non-Buddhist. A passion for living fully in each moment in whatever activity we're engaged in. I think that's more what we're aiming towards. And you can find that practice then in any moment. It's not limited to the Zen temple. And in the introduction of this book, there is a foreword by Narasaki Ikko Roshi, who is one of Nonen's teachers, and one of my teacher, Diane Banaj Roshi's teachers as well, Narasaki Ikko Roshi. In fact, the Kyosaku that I left there at the Nebraska Zen Center last time has Narasaki Ikko Roshi's calligraphy on it. I believe it's his. Or no, maybe this one has it on it. So his calligraphy is very distinctive. In any case, you might not be able to notice that, but in any case, Ikko Roshi wrote the foreword to the Shingi, the Eihei Shingi, and he says right at the beginning, the very first sentence, it's just so important, and I think we gotta really pay close attention to. He says, in Dogen Zenji said, quote, "The Buddha way is right under your feet." The Buddha way is right under your feet. And my teacher's teacher said it a little bit, almost the exact same thing. He said, Hobo Kori Dojo. Right where you walk is your temple, or is your dojo, your place of practice. Right where you walk. if that's the case, then it's not that we don't need a physical location for a temple, but of course all of us live outside of a temple. And so it becomes our responsibility to make where we are our practice place. And we need guidelines. We need guidelines for how to do that. And we have some, luckily. They come, again, they're limited for us because they were geared towards 13th century Japanese monks. But if we can get to the spirit of the Shingi, I think we will find and develop our own Shingi in modern times for householder lay life that is helpful for even our family members, even if they don't practice. So now and I will admit that this is a large ambition of mine to understand more deeply the Shingi as it is, because I have deep respect for it. I practiced living the Shingi when I was in Japan, training at Japanese temples. I practiced living the Shingi, and I also practiced it with my own teacher. And it was only once I started understanding the Shingi that the world made way more sense to me. And that we don't have to put so much effort into figuring out how to end our suffering in our daily life. Because it's been laid out for us moment to moment, day to day, week to week, month to month, of how to manifest enlightenment in every moment. There's a roadmap for it, and that roadmap is called the Shingi. It's called the Shingi. Yes, the roadmap is called the Shingi. So I would encourage the study of it, but I would never encourage you to study the Shingi by yourself. I'd encourage to study it with somebody who understands it and has practiced it, because there's too much in the Shingi that doesn't make sense and that seems or appears on the surface level irrelevant for lay life, or maybe even turns us off from Zen practice. So we need to understand what this Shingi is, what it's about, and how to practice it. All right. One of the examples of the Shingi that I think maybe all of you have heard of, or not all of you, but many of you, at least you guys that have been around for a little while, is called the Tenzo Kyokun. How now? Put up your hands if you've heard of the Tenzo Kyokun, the instructions for the cook. Yeah. So a lot more people have heard of the Tenzo Kyokun. That's a Shingi. And Dogen didn't compile his Shingi. That happened I'm not sure how long after his death. The Shingi, his writings on regulations and rules were compiled after his death and were made into what became known as the Eihei Shingi. And the very first book that was put in there is the Tenzo Kyokun, the instructions to the cook. That's number one. There's 6 books altogether, and the Tenzo Kyokun is the first one. And those of you know, some of you know already, it has detailed instructions for how to be a cook in a Zen monastery. Next time, my next talk, I will talk about that Tenzo Kyokun. But I think for right now, just to put that Tenzo Kyokun, the instructions for the cook, in context. And to say that it's very relevant not only for people living in a monastery, for monks living in a monastery, it's also relevant for lay life and lay practice. There's lots of elements that are relevant for us. So just to make that note there. So my thought on the Shingi is that the Shingi is a kind of blueprint for how to live our life in every moment. In every moment. We can refer to it. And we have to be careful when we use that translation of the word rules or regulations, because as Western practitioners, most of us are Western practitioners, there's this innateness of fewer rules, more free, what we call freedom from rules. And that's not the spirit in which the Shingi was compiled or written. And the way my teacher, Diane Roshi, talked about it is that, and just as a broad generalization, so you'll have to forgive me here, but for Westerners, non-Asian Westerners, we think of freedom as being free from rules or free from form, whereas Japanese, maybe we could extend this to other Asian countries, I just don't know enough, but in Japan, freedom is found within the forms, within the rules, within the discipline, within the regulation. So the more rules, the more regulations, the more opportunity for freedom, for the manifestation of enlightenment. Enlightenment, in other words, doesn't get manifested by throwing out the rules and regulations and doing whatever we want. Right? Freedom isn't, from a Buddhist perspective, freedom isn't getting rid of like all of because those rules and regulations are meant to help us be mindful in every moment. And here's the thing, what I love about these Shingi, that once I started studying them and putting them into practice, particularly in a Japanese Zen monastery context, they are so body oriented. A lot of the Shingi are about what to do with your body, not what to do with your mind. I mean, it can, and especially Dogen Shingi also includes how to orient your mind and your attitude, which is very important too. But there's a lot of it has to do with how to comport your body, your physical body, in various circumstances and situations. Just like the Fukan Zazengi, the instructions for Zazen, gives detailed instructions for what to do with your physical body. Right? So there are how to comport your body in various situations, both situations when you're doing an activity, as well as situations when you're working with other people. And I think if we become aware of these Shingi and the way to comport our body, we're going to develop mindfulness very, very naturally. And I want to give you two examples here, and then I'll close my talk and open for conversation and discussion. The first one is a Shingi that has to do with going to sleep at night. Because remember, Zen practice isn't just about Zazen, it's about wholeheartedly living every moment of our life. And that includes when we go to sleep. And in Dogen's Shingi, the nighttime was considered the start of the day. So going to sleep was considered the beginning of the day. And so you had to pay close attention to what you were doing when you were going to sleep. I'm going to read a bit of the Shingi here for you about that. Dogen Shingi, that is, it says. So, first he quotes a sutra called the 3,000 Deportments. The 3,000 Deportments. 3,000 Deportments is referring to ways of comporting your body, whether it's sitting, standing, walking, or lying down. Right? Those are the four postures that we find ourselves in any moment. And any one of those four postures we can practice in. We can practice developing mindfulness in. So in this sutra, it says there are 5 kinds of manners or rules or regulations. This is the translation here is manners for lying down. In other words, how do we lie down when we're going to sleep? Now immediately you might say, I want to lie down however the hell I want to lie down. right? And we might buck a little bit about being told, given directions for how to lie down. But remember, the spirit here is the development of awareness, the development of mindfulness of what you're doing. And in this case, it's mindfulness about entering sleep. All right? So the first is for your head to be in the direction of the Buddha. All right, so that's a physical orientation. And now this might not be very relevant or obvious for people who don't live in a monastery. But in a Soto Zen temple in Japan, the monks sleep in the Sodo. And the Buddha or Manjushri is at the center of the Sodo. And so the heads of the monks are lined up in the direction of the Buddha or Manjushri. Everybody's sleeping in that direction. So it's a physical comportment right there. Now, so that's just one of 5 things he mentions. But whereas that might not be relevant for our life because we're not living in a monastery, but hold on a minute. There's a couple of ways we can consider how to practice when going to sleep. One is a very literal, create an altar. Create an altar. Maybe it's at the head of your bed. And so that when you sleep, your head is facing the Buddha. Or if you don't want to create an altar, it's not set up right in your home, you can imagine the Buddha at your head. All right? If you want to know where is the Buddha, the direction of the Buddha is when you're sleeping down, the Buddha is that way. And so we can at least begin to think about, okay, what direction is my head, and what is there also accompanying me? So in other words, the Buddha is there with you from morning to night in a loving and compassionate way. And when we think of the Buddha, when we're mindful of the Buddha, that itself is Zen practice. Okay, that's number 1. The second is not to look at the Buddha while lying down. Not to look at the Buddha while lying down. This is really interesting to me because it's even a practice not to look at the Buddha when you're standing up, like an image of the Buddha or a statue of the Buddha. And I'll tell you a story. My teacher went with a Japanese nun to Sojiji in Japan. That's one of the Soto Zen's head temples in Japan. They went to Sojiji for a special ceremony, and my teacher asked if they could see the mummy of Sekito Kisen Daiyosho. They house the mummy of Sekito Kisen Daiyosho, one of the Soto Zen ancestors, at Sojiji. But it's not well advertised, and it's in like a basement portion of it. So the monks obliged them, and they lit up the corridor with flames going down into this basement-like section. And then behind glass was a mummified image of Sekito Kisen sitting in lotus posture, just his bones, and wearing the robe. And so my teacher was just in awe looking at this mummified image of a Chinese Zen ancestor. And then they of course, everything was in silence, and the two of them, my teacher and the Japanese nun, left together. And my teacher then, when they were able to talk again, she said, "What did you think of Sekito Kisen?" And the Japanese nun said, "I don't know, I didn't look up, I didn't see. I only saw his shoes." So for one practice, when approaching a Buddha image, it is not to look directly at the Buddha. And that's exactly what this is saying here too. When you're lying down, don't look at the Buddha. And that's I think of this as not a rule in that if you don't do it, you're going to be damned, right? There's no sense of that here at all. Rather, what happens? It's an experiment. What happens to us mentally, physically, when we make the choice, conscious choice, without any force whatsoever, to not look at a Buddha image when we bow? When we see the Buddha image there, we know it's there, we're just not to look at it. And that spirit, that will generate, well, you see what happens there. You see what happens for yourself. Okay. The third is not to stretch out your legs together. Not to stretch out your legs. In other words, keep the legs bent. The fourth is not to lie down on your back or front. So, in fact, Dogen says a little bit later here, he says, always lay down on your right side when going to sleep with your knees bent and your head, your arm is resting underneath your head like so. So, the point here is not to give us rules that limit our freedom, but to see how we can develop mindfulness in any posture that we're in. And I would encourage you to experiment. And one of my teachers in Japan, he said, even if you can't maintain that posture of sleeping on your right side with your knees bent, even if you can't maintain that posture, start out the night in that way. Start out on your right side as a mindfulness practice, as part of the practice. And Dogen, I love this, this is brilliant. Dogen adds at the end of this, he says, lying down at night, remember the brightness. Remember the brightness. I mean, I think that's brilliant. No pun intended. I was able to share this teaching with my 8-year-old son, and he got it. I said, just before turning out the light, I said, remember the Buddha's at your head, and when I turned out the light, remember the brightness. And he was like, okay, I'm good with it. I'm good with that. The Buddha's here with me. Okay? So we can transmit this to our family, those that might be receptive to it. If it's done, of course, in a way that's not forced. Because if it's forced, it's outside of Soto Zen. If you try to force any of this stuff on anybody, it's not Soto Zen, it's not practice, it's not what we do. We do it out of choice, but we do it out of love for life. We do it out of the desire to bring passion to every moment of our existence, to bring that sense of deep love to every moment of our existence. And so these various forms, we just scratched the surface on one particular one. These various forms can help us to remember the Buddha, remember the practice, and to live fully in each moment, knowing that we're not alone. We're not alone in this world, right? It starts with the expansion of the universe, right? The expansion and contraction. This is happening all the time. We're never alone. And if we can unite ourselves with that expansion and contraction, man, we're gonna live a life that is full of meaning and blessings to not just ourselves, but everybody around us. All right, there was more I wanted to share, but I think that's probably enough for now. And I want to give people opportunity to reflect, ask questions, raise any thing that you feel like that was left unsaid. Thank you so much.
Does anybody have any thoughts, comments, questions? Rishi?
George here, around the corner.
Yeah.
Would you consider like the sesshin schedule to be a shingi?
Very good question. Yeah, so the question is whether the sesshin schedule is a shingi. Absolutely, yeah. In fact, you can find a reference to that in what's called the Gyojikihan. And the Gyojikihan is a Soto Zen manual that compiles the Eihei Shingi and the Keizan Shingi. It compiles those, and there's a section in there on sesshin and creating a sesshin schedule. And like I said, the rules, the forms that you create for a sesshin schedule are they are changeable. And in the Gyoji Kihan, it even says that you can agree amongst the community what the sesshin schedule will be.
I'd just like to explain for people who are fairly new. A sesshin is an extended meditation retreat, and the schedule for that sets up, what times sitting is, what time eating, etc.
Right. Yeah. So thank you for that, Shoju. The sesshin schedule. Sesshin is extended meditation. So generally we do more meditation than is usual, and but just to know that schedule is malleable and should meet the approval or the needs of everybody that is in attendance. All right, so that shows you that there's flexibility within these rules and regulations, but that there's the desired choice, that we're making a choice that yes, this is what we're going to do. This is the way the Buddha's enlightenment is going to be manifest. If it's just one-sided and only one person's making all these rules, then it becomes a dictatorship, and we don't want that, right? But if it's communally agreed upon, okay, these are the rules, this is what we're going to do, maybe not by everybody, but by the leadership there, working together to come up with a schedule.
So maybe the recent Lazy Day retreat by Jikan is an example of that.
Exactly, yes.
He had sort of an idea in mind of, what might be good for the community is this, altered schedule for a retreat day.
Mm-hmm.
It was very nice.
Yeah, meeting the needs of who's there, as opposed to let's fit into these constraining rules and regulations that somebody made a long time ago that are not necessarily relevant for today, right? So we got to be careful about that. And at the same time, respect that, yet we need some kind of forms within which to guide our mind and guide our practice. And like I said, I just read from a bit on going to sleep at night, but there's a whole slew of rules for the cook and how to cook. Not what to cook, actually what to cook as well, but how to cook, that we would benefit from studying. And there's also rules and regulations for the Ino, the person who is the kind of the disciplinarian of a Zen monastery for monks, that may have some application to us as well. So anyways, my purpose here is to get ourselves at least familiarized with this word Shingi, and to really consider that Zazen, that Zen practice is much greater than Zazen. It's much greater than seated meditation. And that we ought to start thinking about how do we practice in everyday daily life. And it could be as simple as, maybe I'll just sleep on my right side when I go to bed this evening and remember the brightness. It could be as simple as that, just as a start. But there's a lot of other stuff. So I'm hoping to introduce some more of these Shingi over the next several, anyways, we'll see where it goes.
I think Hayden had a question.
So my question has two parts. How are your dishes? How are your dishes in your sink? Are they in your sink? And
Right.
the second part is, I noticed since I've started coming here that it's easy for myself and perhaps others to find ourselves caught up in forms and rules and kind of the ritual, But I've noticed that, at least for me, that can get in the way of the actual experience. How do we be mindful? Like, it feels like often we are running through a script instead of being in our moment. Can you
Right.
talk about that?
Great question. That's a really good question. So yeah, we're running. So if we're too tied to form, then that can get in the way of being present, being in the present moment. I think the only way, this is where maturity has to fit in, has to come into your practice, and you have to be. This is an experiment. You have to. Does the form help you generate mindfulness, or are you already present fully? But do you know the form well enough that you can say that? Do you know the form well enough? The form, so we have to be careful here too, because ego can get in our way. That's one of the reasons why there are forms, and we don't necessarily have to like these forms, these rules, these regulations. We don't necessarily have to like them, but they can give us an opportunity to shine the light or to mirror back to us our own egos at work. Like that discontent side of ourselves, the side that says, I like this, I don't like that, right? So it's an opportunity to look at our likes and our dislikes. So if you've really dealt with the form and you've dealt with those likes and dislikes, then maybe you can drop that particular form for the moment, right? Especially if there's other things going on that it's not really helpful or relevant to be practicing that form in that particular moment. Maybe that's why there's forms for everything. But the backdrop question is, how do I be in this moment? That's got to be our backdrop question, is what's the Dharma of this moment? Or the way my teacher would say it, how do I practice the Dharma right here? Right? How do I live right here, right now in the Dharma? Not putting myself first, not putting myself last. How do I practice the Dharma right here and right now? That's got to be the foremost question in our mind. Not the form might help us with that, and this is where it's more of an experiment than a rigid rule to follow blindly, because you can do the form so well that you become mindless in doing the form. You want to learn the form, you want to have that beginner's mind. And even if you're doing it 100 times, you could still, that's even a better place to actually, when you've done it many, many times, is to keep the beginner's mind. That's what Suzuki Roshi says. In the expert's mind, there are a few possibilities. In the beginner's mind, there are many. So if we've become an expert at the forms, that's not the direction we want to go in. We have to keep, he says, always keep your beginner's mind. Even if you've done something 100 times already, where's the beginner's mind? That's got to be in the back of our mind all the time. How do I practice the Dharma right here, right now? I see a question here on, let's see, oh, where did that question go? I saw a question there and then it disappeared. All right, any others?
Well, I think forms and gathas will take you far.
Forms and gathas. So yes, Summer is a veteran here, and I appreciate you saying that. Yes. What, you want to say more about it? What's been your experience with that? How have forms informed your Zen practice?
Well, you know, when I was with the Arcata Zen group, we also had a practice committee, and they were big time on forms, and they thought that sometimes the reason the Sangha might slip or whatever was form slipped. They would say that, form slipped. Oh. So they were kind of, the way the form was kind of more exacting, I guess you might say, but what I learned about that in the time I was there was that you know, and it was like you were saying, when you're first learning it, you're like, who needs all this garb? Who needs all this, you know? And then when you really learn about the form and what it is, and then, like you say, after you've done it hundreds of times, it takes on, to me, it takes on a deeper meaning.
Mm-hmm.
It takes on a much deeper meaning. And then the little gathas, you know, of which there are an endless variety, you know, but as I pour this coffee up, you know, may I be mindful of all the hands it took to bring this to us.
Mm-hmm.
Or you know, just gathas for starting your car, everything has a gatha, and if you'll actualize that,
Right.
I like it.
You're pointing to a good, that's also a deep practice within Zen Buddhism. And Thich Nhat Hanh's community, they rely heavily on some of those gathas, those short sayings, prior to doing any particular mundane activity, like washing the dishes, going to the bathroom, brushing your teeth, washing your hands, starting your car, etc. These are all ways to engage your mind in the present moment, engage your mind and body in the present moment.
And you also touched on, you know, how Japanese people or whatever, or Zen practitioners live in a community with all these rules and that. And that's where freedom is found in Thich Nhat Hanh's book, Stepping into Freedom. I remember when I first read that, it was when I was kind of new at Zen, and you turn the first page and it's don't do this, don't do that, don't do this. I'm like, this is freedom?
Right. But, you know, if you're living in a communal context and you put those into practice, you're going to find your harmony right there. Of course, there's downsides to this if we get too rigid, but we need to know these rules and regulations thoroughly. Now, we're only together for a short time. You know, there's a large group of us together right now on Sunday for an hour to 2 hour, 2 hour time span. So, so you're not going to experience the breadth of that in that time period. But we should think about what is the Dharma when we enter a Zen temple? What is the Dharma of this moment? And the word I think I want to really hone in here on is, how do I serve? How do I serve? How can I serve the community in this moment? What can I do to serve? What might that look like? What might that manifest as? And so that requires us to open our attention and look around, see what needs to be done. Again, this is my teacher saying, see what needs to be done right here, right now, in the Dharma, not putting yourself first or last. And sesshin, we're living together for a Friday afternoon to Sunday afternoon, so a good full 48 hours or so. And it's also an opportunity to engage and practice these Shingi. And to put that in the back of our mind, how do I serve? What can I do to serve? Or what's needed right here and right now in the Dharma? That's the question.
And Shin, if I could briefly comment on the forums, which you know I would, and did so. I'm just thinking about how last year I went to Hokioji, the Zen practice community in southern Minnesota. I was there for a week. I was pretty much a stranger there, though I knew, I was familiar with some of the teachers. Otherwise, everybody else there I didn't know. But they were all experienced practitioners. There's 3 transmitted teachers, 2 ordained teachers, everybody else pretty much had a rakusu. They were all, well-versed in practice. And yet we all knew the forms. And so there was immediately an unspoken communication with all of us through our body practice. Mm-hmm. There was immediate harmony going on. And through the days, you could really see how Zen practice really is a very refined, elegant, dignified practice. Oh, you would not, with the forms and how you stand and how you move, very dignified practice. It's elegant. It's wonderful to watch. When you've got all good practitioners coming together, not saying a word, yet bowing to each other and being gracious with each other and everything else.
There you go. Yeah, this is the manifestation of enlightenment in everyday activity. Right? That's awesome. Thanks for that example. That's a really good example. I'm glad you had that experience. Yeah, when people know and our job, you know, the teacher's job and the senior student's job is to continue to refine those forms, because there's more we can learn through them and the refining of them. You know, for example, when you bow, we bow, touch our head down to the ground, we lift our hands up. And so here's a you know subtle tip here. When you lift your hands up, you're keeping your palms parallel to the floor, and you can imagine this is right from Soto Zen literature. The Buddha's feet. You're holding up the Buddha's feet in your hand. So if you're going like this, what you're doing is flipping the Buddha over your head, right? So it's a very refined bow where you're lifting your foreheads touching the floor, and your hands are parallel to the floor, and you're lifting the feet of the Buddha up over your head and back down. Right? So again, these forms, they're meant to help us generate that kind of mindfulness. So I'm looking forward to sharing more with you. Let's look at the Tenzo Kyokun and some other things and have fun with it. Anything else before we close for today? Next week we've got sesshin, so an opportunity to do that. Even if you can't come for a full sesshin, I really recommend coming for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever you can make, because it's such a service to the community. To enter a sesshin, even for a couple of hours, and sit zazen, you're entering this vortex of mindfulness, and it immediately settles you down. So it's such a service. So take advantage of it. If you can come out Friday evening for sitting, or Saturday afternoon, or come for a Dharma talk, check in with us about the schedule. So if you want to enter in at a certain time frame, but of course, then we'll also have Sunday Open Zen next week as well.
Daishin, do I understand that the representative from Soroshu is going to be here?
I don't know anything about that.
Okay, it showed up in the newsletter draft, and I thought, oh, is this something new? But I think somebody must have picked it up from some former something.
Yeah.
I was surprised. Yeah, okay. That would be the first announcement, which is sesshin next weekend. You can register online